November 1943, South Pacific, near the Solomon Islands. The sea was a black mirror, silent except for the slow churn of propellers beneath the surface. Inside the cramped steel hull of a Japanese submarine, the air was thick with diesel fumes and sweat. The commander leaned over his chart table, tracing the path of an American convoy reported 2 hours earlier. His men listened through hydrophones, straining to catch the faint thrum of merchant engines. Somewhere in the dark, a dozen American ships moved steadily across the Pacific. A perfect target, or so they believed. Through the periscope, the horizon was empty. No ships, no searchlights, no sign of danger. The commander whispered an order to rise for a firing position. But before the torpedoes could be loaded, a sudden pulse swept through the deep. A faint ping. Then another. The sound grew sharper, closer, mechanical, rhythmic, unnatural. Moments later, explosions tore through the water. The submarine rolled violently, lights flickering, pipes bursting. The commander shouted for evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. Above them, the Americans were no longer searching by sight. They were hunting with radar. That night, the ocean itself had changed. By late 1943, the Pacific had become a battlefield that stretched beyond the horizon. Japan's empire still spanned thousands of miles, from the Philippines to the Solomons, but the tide was beginning to turn. The United States, once caught off guard at Pearl Harbor, was now pushing forward with staggering industrial strength. In the early years of the war, Japanese submarines had hunted with confidence. They were longer-ranged than most Allied designs, capable of patrolling from the home islands to Australia and even the American West Coast. Their commanders were experienced, their tactics disciplined, and their crews deeply loyal to the Emperor. In 1942, they had struck fear into Allied shipping lanes. But by 1943, something had changed. American convoys were no longer easy prey. The once vulnerable merchant ships now traveled in organized formations, escorted by destroyers bristling with new electronic systems. Submarine commanders who had relied on stealth and the human ear found themselves stalked by invisible eyes. Radar, once a secret Allied experiment, was now standard on almost every U.S. Navy warship. It could see through fog, darkness, and even the deceptive calm of the Pacific night. The Japanese command, however, underestimated its reach. They believed the ocean's vastness still offered them safety. Convoy after convoy began to slip past undetected. When Japanese submarines attacked, American escorts appeared from nowhere, turning from prey to hunter in seconds. The Imperial Japanese Navy tried to understand how their carefully timed ambushes were being countered, but the answers were elusive. To them, it seemed as if the Americans had gained a sixth sense. In Tokyo, naval strategists reviewed combat reports filled with the same haunting pattern. Enemy detected us before we sighted them. Each engagement ended the same way. Radar-equipped destroyers closing in, depth charges falling with deadly precision, and silence where a proud submarine once prowled. This wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of a new kind of warfare, one ruled not by eyesight or intuition, but by invisible waves bouncing through the air. And in the deep waters of the South Pacific, Japan's submarine force was about to discover just how far behind it had fallen. The shift in power had begun quietly, not in a battle, but in laboratories and shipyards thousands of miles away. The foundation of America's radar revolution was built years before the Pacific battles began. By 1940, scientists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory and the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory had refined compact radar sets capable of detecting ships and aircraft far beyond visual range. When war erupted, those early experiments transformed into full-scale production. The SG radar, introduced in 1942, became a quiet but decisive weapon. Mounted on destroyers, cruisers, and later even landing craft, It used a 10-centimeter wavelength that cut through heavy weather and sea clutter. Unlike earlier systems, it could pinpoint a target's direction and distance with astonishing accuracy. To the naked eye, the ocean at night was endless and empty. To radar operators, it was alive with moving echoes. In contrast, Japan's radar development lagged behind. Though Japanese scientists understood the theory, wartime shortages and strict secrecy slowed progress. Their submarine fleet entered 1943 still relying on periscopes, sound detection, and intuition. Tools effective in 1941, but nearly obsolete 2 years later. The Imperial Navy's doctrine had been built on bold offense and surprise. It wasn't designed to counter an enemy that could see without light. The difference became painfully clear during convoy operations in the Solomon Islands and around New Guinea. American destroyers equipped with SG radar began detecting Japanese submarines before they surfaced. Searchlights no longer needed to sweep the sea. Radar told them exactly where to aim. Submarines that once crept in silence now faced an enemy that could sense their presence the moment they rose to periscope depth. At first, Japanese commanders dismissed the losses as bad luck. But as reports accumulated, identical in tone, describing unseen detection and perfectly timed counterattacks, disbelief turned into alarm. The ocean that had once been their shield had become a transparent hunting ground. American warships, powered by superior electronics and precise coordination, were rewriting the rules of naval warfare. Every radar pulse extended U.S. control deeper into the Pacific, linking destroyers, aircraft, and command centers into a single aware network. For Japan's submarine force, each patrol now carried the shadow of unseen danger. By the end of 1943, the Japanese Navy still hadn't found a reliable answer. Engineers rushed to develop their own radar sets, but by the time they reached the fleet, the Allies were already 2 generations ahead. The war beneath the waves was no longer fought in darkness. It was fought between those who could see and those who could only guess. Radar didn't just change how the U.S. Navy fought. It redefined what awareness meant at sea. Before radar, destroyers and escorts depended entirely on lookouts and sound detection. Even in calm weather, a submarine could slip through a convoy's outer ring under the cover of night. But once radar entered the equation, darkness no longer offered protection. The SG radar system became the destroyer's most trusted weapon. Its 10-centimeter microwave beam could detect a surfaced submarine up to 15 miles away, far beyond the reach of any periscope or human eye. A single operator, watching a glowing cathode screen in a dim control room, could track enemy movements in real time. Convoy commanders used those signals to position ships with mathematical precision, closing gaps in their defenses and directing escorts toward any approaching contact. The change was immediate. Submarines that surfaced to recharge batteries or transmit coordinates suddenly found themselves ambushed by radar-guided destroyers. A faint echo on a screen often led to a flare in the night sky, followed by the deep rumble of depth charges. To the Americans, this was the ultimate reversal. The hunted had become the hunter. Radar allowed them to strike first, often without ever being seen. In the Atlantic, British and American ships had already proven radar's effectiveness against U-boats. In the Pacific, its arrival made the Japanese experience the same fear their German allies had once inflicted on Allied convoys. Technologically, radar also reshaped coordination between sea and air. Patrol bombers and carrier-based aircraft, guided by radar signals and ship-to-air communication, began to patrol wider sectors. Submarines could no longer surface even during daylight without risking detection from multiple directions. The ocean's vastness, once Japan's greatest ally, had turned into a transparent battlefield mapped by invisible waves. Radar transformed American destroyer tactics as well. Instead of random sweeps, they moved in calculated search patterns, forming radar picket lines that intercepted submarines long before they approached a convoy. The sonar operators would then take over, confirming the contact, and the attack sequence began with cold, practiced precision. Every pulse of radio energy gave the U.S. Navy a sense of omnipresence that no amount of courage or stealth could overcome. For the Japanese submarine crews, this unseen force felt supernatural, as if the Americans could read the sea itself. And soon, those who survived would realize it wasn't luck or fate. It was science, perfected and weaponized. Inside Japan's submarines, the war had taken on a different rhythm, one of silence, discipline, and mounting fear. Crews who had once believed themselves invisible began to doubt every shadow and sound. The hydrophone operators, trained to listen for propeller noise, now heard only confusion, faint echoes that made no sense. They would whisper to their commanders that something was out there, but they couldn't say what. For the officers, the humiliation was deeper. These were veterans of the early Pacific victories, men who had prowled off Australia, India, even Hawaii, sinking ships with precision and pride. Yet by 1943, their confidence was eroding. Missions ended abruptly. Comrades never returned, and rumors spread through the fleet about ghost destroyers that attacked in complete darkness. Japanese command reports, later recovered after the war, described the frustration clearly. Many commanders insisted that Allied ships appeared suddenly without warning. Some believed the Americans had found a way to detect submarines through water itself. In reality, it was radar guiding destroyers to their approximate position, and sonar finishing the job once contact was made. The psychological toll was immense. Submarine duty had always been dangerous, but now it felt hopeless. Every patrol felt like walking into a trap. The ocean that had once been a hiding place was now a cage surrounded by unseen watchers. Even at the highest levels of command, understanding came too slowly. The Imperial Japanese Navy's research divisions were fragmented, often competing for resources. While scientists like Yoji Ito had already begun experimenting with radar prototypes in 1941, Japan's industrial shortages and tight secrecy slowed development. Equipment that might have changed the balance never reached operational units in time. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence intercepted Japanese radio traffic that revealed confusion about radar's true nature. Some commanders believed the Americans were using advanced direction-finding systems or magnetic sensors. Few grasped the full picture. That radar was a complete transformation of warfare, merging science with command in a way Japan's doctrine had never imagined. The result was a silent collapse in confidence. Submarine crews began to operate more cautiously, attacking less often and spending more time submerged, which reduced their effectiveness. The Imperial Navy's most loyal warriors were trapped in a war of technology they couldn't see and couldn't fight back against. What began as a tactical advantage for the U.S. had become something deeper, a psychological weapon that stripped Japan's submariners of the very thing they had relied on most, the belief that they could not be seen. November 1943, off New Guinea. The night was calm, and the sea lay flat beneath a pale crescent moon. The Japanese submarine I-37 moved silently at periscope depth, its commander confident they were unseen. Through the thin glass of the periscope lens, he could just make out the faint silhouettes of an American convoy moving northeast, cargo ships flanked by destroyers. It was the perfect ambush. Calm seas, minimal moonlight, and no aircraft overhead. The crew moved with quiet precision. Torpedoes were loaded, firing solutions calculated. The commander lowered his voice, giving the order to approach within 5,000 yards. Every man aboard knew the plan: fire, dive, and slip away before the Americans could react. But above them, aboard the USS Radford, an SG radar screen had already caught a faint moving echo. The radar officer marked its course. Low, steady, and unlike any surface vessel. Within seconds, the destroyer's captain ordered a turn toward the contact. The rest of the escort group adjusted position in unison, their formation tightening like a closing fist. The Japanese commander, unaware he'd been detected, raised his periscope one last time. The instant he did, a searchlight snapped on, brilliant and blinding. "Dive! Dive!" he shouted. The submarine dropped fast, ballast tanks flooding, gauges trembling. Then came the first pattern of depth charges. 5, then 10, each detonation slamming the hull like thunder underwater. Pipes burst, lights flickered. The crew gripped whatever they could as the ocean shook around them. Within minutes, the sea above was alive with destroyers, radar guiding sonar, sonar guiding weapons. Every movement of the submarine was being read and predicted. The Japanese commander ordered evasive turns, trying to slip away into the thermocline, but the Americans adjusted flawlessly. Another pattern of charges followed. One found its mark. A blinding flash tore through the control room, followed by rushing water. The submarine tilted, falling toward the deep. On the surface, the American destroyers circled once more, sonar confirming silence. The radar operators logged the final coordinates and marked the kill. To them, it was just another contact, another victory in a growing list. But beneath the waves, it was the moment Japan's undersea hunters truly became the hunted. What had once been stealth had become vulnerability, and from that night forward, the balance of power beneath the Pacific shifted permanently. In the months that followed, what happened to I-37 became the fate of many. The Americans had perfected a system, one that blended radar, sonar, and disciplined coordination into a seamless chain of destruction. By early 1944, entire hunter-killer groups were assigned to patrol convoy routes, each one a moving fortress of detection. Radar was the first warning. It told U.S. ships where to look. Once a radar contact was made, sonar took over, listening, tracking, and locking on to the precise location of the submarine. Every escort vessel knew its role. Destroyers circled outward, corvettes filled the gaps, and aircraft above coordinated from radar-equipped carriers. It was warfare conducted like clockwork, with machines providing clarity where human senses once failed. For the Japanese, it was a nightmare of inevitability. Submarines surfaced only at night to charge batteries, but even darkness no longer guaranteed safety. The SG radar could spot a periscope or conning tower miles away. When aircraft joined the chase, equipped with their own radar and lee lights, the ocean offered nowhere to hide. In early 1944, American destroyers near Truk Lagoon hunted down I-175, a veteran submarine that had once helped sink the USS Liscombe Bay. This time the advantage was reversed. Detected by radar while surfacing, it was attacked by coordinated destroyers and bombers, all guided by the same unseen signal. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes. No survivors were recovered. U.S. naval intelligence began recording these encounters as proof of a new warfare doctrine: radar-controlled anti-submarine operations. Training manuals emphasized radar discipline, night interception tactics, and the use of electronic coordination between surface ships and aircraft. The system spread rapidly, turning every American convoy into a mobile trap. By mid-1944, Japanese submarine operations in the Central Pacific had all but collapsed. Their attacks were sporadic, their results minimal. Entire flotillas vanished without a trace. Crews stopped sending nightly position reports to avoid detection, but silence only isolated them further. For the U.S. Navy, radar was more than a tool. It was the embodiment of a new kind of superiority. It allowed American commanders to fight with foresight, not guesswork. Battles were no longer decided by who saw first, but by who understood what could not be seen. In that invisible contest, Japan never stood a chance. The Pacific had turned against them. Not with waves or storms, but with signals echoing across the water, carrying the future of warfare in every pulse. By the end of 1944, Japan's once proud submarine force was a shadow of what it had been. Out of more than 170 operational boats, over 120 were lost, most to radar-guided attacks. What had begun as a strategic weapon of surprise had turned into a slow-motion disaster. The statistics told the story clearly. In 1942, Japanese submarines had sunk over 180,000 tons of Allied shipping. 2 years later, that number had fallen below 30,000. Many boats never returned from their first patrol. Crews disappeared without distress calls, without even the sound of a final torpedo. Only silence. Broken days later by American depth charge reports marking another confirmed kill. The Americans, meanwhile, had perfected the art of detection. Their destroyers, particularly the Fletcher-Class, became the backbone of radar-based convoy defense. Using SG radar and sonar in tandem, they created protective nets around transport fleets that stretched for miles. It wasn't uncommon for radar operators to detect a submarine minutes after it surfaced, giving escort ships time to intercept before the enemy even sighted its target. The Japanese Navy tried desperately to respond. New radar models like the Type 13 and Type 22 were rushed into production, but they were bulky, unreliable, and inferior in range and precision. Few submarines ever received them, and those that did still lacked the training to use them effectively. More crucially, Japan never developed a radar warning receiver. The simple device that allowed U.S. submarines to detect enemy radar sweeps and dive in time. As a result, Japanese commanders sailed blind into electromagnetic fields that revealed their exact positions. By early 1945, Allied convoys moved across the Pacific with growing confidence. What had once been perilous supply routes now operated like extensions of American industry. Steady, coordinated, and protected by technology that turned darkness into daylight. Radar had done what torpedoes and tactics never could. It had erased the element of surprise from Japan's undersea war. When Japan's defeat finally came in August 1945, the few surviving submarine crews returned to a homeland they barely recognized. The Imperial Navy that had once ruled the Pacific was gone, its fleets shattered by superior production and technology. For the men who had fought beneath the waves, the war's end brought not relief, but reflection. Post-war interrogations conducted by Allied intelligence revealed a recurring theme in their testimonies: disbelief at how completely radar had changed the battlefield. Many commanders admitted they never fully understood what was happening. One former officer of the I-176 reportedly told investigators, "It was as if the Americans could see through the sea itself." In truth, they nearly could. By 1945, radar was woven into every layer of U.S. naval warfare, from surface fleets to carrier aircraft and even submarines. American boats, equipped with radar of their own, hunted Japanese shipping at night with near-perfect efficiency. The advantage had become absolute. Technologically, the lessons of that struggle would shape post-war naval doctrine. The United States doubled down on radar development, leading to the birth of combat information centers. Rooms filled with screens, plotting tables, and trained operators linking every sensor into one coherent picture of battle. The age of networked warfare had begun. Japan, meanwhile, studied its own defeat carefully in the years that followed. Surviving scientists and naval engineers admitted that their biggest failure had not been courage or willpower, but coordination. Innovation existed, but secrecy, pride, and limited resources had kept it fragmented. They had underestimated a nation that could combine science, industry, and command into one machine of war. The destruction of Japan's submarine force was more than a tactical loss. It was a warning to every future navy. In modern war, the unseen decides the outcome long before the first shot is fired. And in the Pacific, the Americans had mastered the unseen. The story of Japan's submariners is not just one of defeat, it's a lesson in how quickly war can outgrow human perception. For centuries, battles were won by eyesight, instinct, and courage. But in the vast Pacific, those senses were no longer enough. The war beneath the waves was decided by pulses of energy no man could see or hear, only measure. Radar didn't just help America win naval supremacy. It reshaped the very meaning of power. It turned technology into awareness, awareness into precision, and precision into survival. For the first time in history, the sea was transparent to those who understood its physics. For Japanese commanders trained to fight by feel and tradition, that shift was devastating. They faced an enemy that saw without looking, struck without warning, and learned faster than any doctrine could adapt. Their courage never wavered, but courage alone couldn't counter a revolution built on science. After the war, radar would evolve into something far greater, the foundation of modern surveillance, air defense, and global navigation. The same invisible waves that doomed the submarines of the Pacific would one day guide ships safely home and watch over oceans once ruled by fear. But in 1943, none of that was visible. To the men trapped inside the steel hulls of Japan's submarines, it felt as if the ocean itself had turned against them, as if the deep had betrayed its silence. Their story is a reminder that in war, the most powerful weapons are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the quiet signals that no one sees until it's too late.